Okay, welcome everyone to this panel, which is the Psychology of Fashion Future, Doom and Gloom or an Opportunity for Radical Openness, which is hosted as part of the Fashion Means Business session curated by London College of Fashion. And I'm very happy to introduce the panel here today. I'm Professor Finola Kerrigan. I'm the Director of the Fashion Business Research Centre at London College of Fashion, and I'm a Professor of Marketing. I'm very happy to have a great panel here today that encompass a range of the roles across the industry that are relevant. And so I want to go to each one by one and ask them to introduce themselves and tell them a little bit about you. So I'll just go in the order that people are on my screen. So first, we've got Angela Stavreska.
Hi, I'm Ange and I'm a perfumer and UK Creative Director of CPL Aromas. So my specialist area is obviously fragrance and fragrance products.
Thank you. And next we've got Kay Copeland.
Hi everyone, I'm Kay Copeland. I'm co-founder and managing director of Sister London. We are a creative agency based in Carnaby Street, and we look after lots of fashion and lifestyle brands, as well as destinations, so lots of retail stores, and our job is to promote them to consumers.
Thanks. Next we've got Florence Adepoju.
Hey everyone, I'm Flo and I'm the founder of MDM Flo, a makeup line that I started in 2013 after graduating from the London College of Fashions. I studied cosmetic science, and I also have a wellness and skincare line that I recently launched called Flo Beauty Co. Great, thanks. And finally, Palvinder Mann.
Hi everyone, I'm Palvinder. I have been working for the past 8 or 9 years in the luxury cosmetic sector, so have held a variety of roles which encompass corporate roles within L'Oreal Group, Estée Lauder Group, and then most recently Charlotte Tilbury Beauty.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk about a range of things today, but I want to start by asking everybody about the key kind of psychological factors that you think influence both people working within this sector, but also the consumers. And I think we talked a little bit before we started recording about how that might have changed, how kind of consumer psychology might have shifted. So I'm not sure who would like to give their reflections on that.
I don't mind starting. I think I've been observing for, I would say since before the pandemic started. I feel like a lot of the trends that it has exacerbated were already in motion in a way before it came to happen. I feel like we, as a race, were so geared towards short-term gratifications and immediate distractions that our value system was kind of built around them. And now being in this ordeal, which has really removed us from or deprived us of those sources, whether that be sort of socializing with your friends or be able to go into shops and consume what you want when you want, it's kind of forced us to reevaluate what that value system is. And I feel like there's been a regression to things that we hold most dear at a very fundamental level. So human relationships, preservation of the planet and our environment, respect for fellow man. And it's really interesting to see how now those priorities and values are playing out in how we consume and how we interact with brands and what we look for from brands. And I feel like we're seeing the fallout from brands who kind of preempted this and kind of acted in advance and were already changing the way they act, or new brands that were born out of these new trends versus brands that stuck to the old way of doing things and the old codes of what makes a brand successful, what makes a luxury brand. So I think, yeah, it's definitely, I know I'm not the first to kind of draw parallels between this period and like the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, where there were these giant socioeconomical shifts which changed the way we interact with brands. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing to observe as it plays out.
I'd just like to add as well, from a fragrance point of view, obviously historically fragrance has been an extremely important part of people's lives because it kept them safe from eating food that had gone off. The smell of fear is actually a pheromone effect where if you're in a group of people, if somebody senses danger, then the sort of smell of fear permeates through the group, so everybody's alerted to it. And then over the sort of centuries, fragrance has kind of taken a bit of a backseat, and now it's kind of seen as quite a frivolous product in a way. But again, I think with this whole Renaissance idea and the Renaissance of science coming back, I think people are now starting to research fragrance again properly and seeing the psychological effects of fragrance in a much more profound way than we have done ever before, really. So I think that's quite exciting from a sort of fragrance perspective.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think to add, I feel how people see brands now is changing. I think it's definitely a lot more of a personal thing. And I think people see the brands that they shop from and the brands that they connect with as almost like like a self-identification of who they are and their personal kind of ethics. And I think brands have been speaking about community for a really long time, but I think the way that people are able to personally engage, whether it's through social like communities, whether it's through like reading content in newsletters, or however people are engaging with brands, like there's an expectation that this brand has to represent me. And I think like Palvinder said, it's almost like an acceleration, like this was happening. And it was kind of like, oh, you know, these cool, quirky brands that are coming in and they care about the environment and they care about sustainability and they care about carbon neutrality. And now people are like, actually, I really care about this. So I'm seeking this from a brand, and where there is kind of an authentic connection, like brands are seeing a lot of success. And I think for me, I'm probably jumping the gun, but I'm very interested to see like something again that we discussed before, like this shift from brands dictating and directing how product development goes to consumers having an expectation and brands having to meet that expectation.
Yeah, I think the key word that you just said, Flo, was the being authentic. I think that brands, you know, now have to have that authenticity behind them, because everything is so much more open now. You know, it's very easy for a consumer to look at, you know, behind the scenes through social media and Google, and, you know, as much as speaking to peers and to friends. So I feel like there's no sort of hiding anymore. You know, brands are very exposed in a good way, and I think that that's showing through in, you know, lots of brands' marketing strategies, and I think that's good for everyone. It's good for the planet going forward.
And I wonder how, you know, we've often had this kind of thing when we look at business with the kind of David and Goliath. So the huge brands who control all the spaces, all the voice, and then the little challengers that come up. But are we seeing something now where the challengers can get into that space and look more authentic, if you like, however we're thinking about that? Because a lot of these brands tell their story, and their story is usually the market was not providing that thing that I felt was important, so now I'm doing it. So how do you think that kind of plays out, and how will all of these shifts kind of coexist?
I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for like new brands, new concepts, new ideas, but also because there's been a bit of a leveling of the playing field in terms of barriers to like just entry, there's also a lot of saturation. So in some ways, like there's a lot of opportunity, like you feel like you can do anything, but on the other hand, you come up with a concept, or you come up with an idea or a theme, or even just a design, even a logo, and you go on Instagram and you see it straight away, or a version of it, because there's just so much that's out there. And I feel like also I don't want this time to be like romanticized, because I still do feel like there's a lot that big brands do that has an advantage. Like I can't, you know, spend loads of money on billboards or take up loads of digital ad space. But I think the things that like the Davids have is your ability to change. And especially I think a key thing that where there's a massive opportunity is supply chain. And I think it's so easy or it's a lot easier for smaller brands to kind of make key decisions about how, you know, shortening their supply chain. And that the margin or the cost not having as huge an impact on their business as some of the bigger brands in the industry. So I think there's like key areas that are kind of like the golden ticket. And like what we were saying before about like transparency, if you can be transparent to your community and to people who care, and like we said before, more and more people care, I feel like that's where the opportunity is. And it's not always like the cosmetic stuff that's going to make the difference, I think.
Yeah, and I guess, so as someone who's researched consumer behavior for about 20 years, one thing that I understand is that people care, but they don't necessarily know where to direct their care. So there are just so many issues, from environmental to human rights and so on. So how do you help people to figure out what are the issues that your companies or the companies you work with can help them navigate? How do you decide kind of what to work on? So I don't know, Ange.
We've kind of been talking, and within the beauty industry and as a whole, there's a lot of talk about clean beauty, which has come over from the US. It's obviously a massive trend, but we're finding that there's no kind of firm definition, and lots of brands talk about it in lots of different ways. And I think that just confuses the consumer. So, I mean, at CPL Aromas, we work behind a lot of different brands, fine fragrance brands, beauty brands, home fragrance brands. And even we are kind of starting to become a bit more consumer facing just by trying to educate consumers, because fragrances are really complex. Consumers don't really understand what goes into them. And really, we're in the best position to actually explain what exactly clean means, where all these raw materials get sourced from, how they get sourced. And I think it's kind of opening it up, and it's not just about the brands talking about what is relevant to them, but actually about the whole supply chain and being extremely open, because that's what people are interested in. That's what the whole product is about.
Yeah, I feel like the onus is on everyone on that question to drive the change, because on the one hand, you have the suppliers, to Ange's point, you totally need to educate, because they actually are the guardians of all that information as far as the most technical elements of the product they're producing. You have brands who need to focus on prioritizing the more sustainable and the more sort of forward-thinking suppliers, so that actually it drives the price down for everyone to be able to access those solutions. Because for a startup brand to access what might be a very say responsible, ethical manufacturing method, it could be super expensive just because it's not solicited by many people. So I feel like those big brands need to be part of driving that solution as well. And then you have the consumer who needs to be, more and more discerning in terms of what they purchase and the brands that they will actually visit. And actually, I've been encouraged to see brands more and more from different organizations collaborating with one another, which I don't think they would have done in decades past, because there's this big stigma around, working with your competitors. For example, I've seen L'Oreal, as one example, have just released a tool which helps brands to quantify the impact that their supply chain has on the environment. And I know that Estée Lauder Group has signed up to it, among a few others. So it's a way for the industry as a whole to measure the impact of their long-term ambitions in that area, their short-term projects, which I think is really important, because there should be really one sort of standard benchmark which allows us to say, by 2020 or 2025 or 2030, we want to have reduced carbon emission by XYZ or reduced water pollution by XYZ. But if everyone's using a different metric, that becomes quite arbitrary. So I think it is a case of, as Ange said, coming together as a whole industry, whether you're consumer side or supplier side or brand side, to drive that.
I think also that, one of the positive things from the pandemic is that, consumers are reevaluating the brands that they're buying. The whole sort of shop local sort of mentality, I feel, has been really good, and it's an amazing opportunity for smaller brands or independent brands or brands launching new concepts. Because I feel like consumers, are more open to that now. Yes, of course, they're still always, going to be shopping those big brands too. But I feel like there's definitely more of a focus on independent businesses and new concepts that people are willing to try and support, which I think is great for the industry going forward.
Yeah, and obviously what happens when there's an economic downturn or reassessment of things, that people start to think about their own values. But they also think about, they really feel like where they put their money is a really important choice. And so we've seen in previous economic downturns, you know, people would predict that spending on things like cosmetics, fragrances, these kind of things would drop, whereas in fact, we saw the opposite. So some companies do very well because we know that people still need to feel good about themselves or kind of bring aesthetic elements into their life. It's not just all this kind of, you know, kind of cutting back. So how do you think people can navigate this idea that, you know, we're all very sympathetic to people need to spend more carefully, maybe buy less, but still address some of these bigger issues about specifically where you spend and what kind of issues you're supporting or ignoring in your spending?
I think that people massively underplay the benefit of emotional well-being and how that impacts, like, you know, everything about a person's life, and how like small things can make the difference. And I think like when we look at like historically, for example, in the like makeup industry, it's been about like the lipstick effect. People spend more money on lipsticks because they, you know, the like traditional case study is they go into job interviews, they want to be confident, so they're gonna get a lipstick because, and also they might not be able to buy like a luxury handbag or whatever. And I think like deeper than that, like case study is just the fact that, you know, this specific item is linked to confidence. And we've spoken about purchasing decisions based on, you know, people shopping local or people having an understanding of supply chain, making them feel like they're doing something for the environment, and they may not necessarily feel like they, you know, can like plant a tree or stop the disposal of like certain materials, but that's how in their little way they are making a difference. And I feel like because of the way that the beauty and cosmetics industry is seen, sometimes it's just seen as like so frivolous, but actually as an individual, if you feel like you can make an impact by like one act, like you're going to do it. And I feel like even talking into like the marketing end and how brands kind of communicate with their community and with their customers, I feel like there's a massive opportunity for brands to like highlight that and kind of maybe pull away from just the aesthetic elements of people purchasing from them.
I think accessibility as well is quite key. I mean, a lot of the sort of premium beauty and fragrance brands are obviously quite expensive. And I think people, even in a downturn, they still want these quality products. But if they can't afford a 100ml bottle, then maybe they can afford a smaller bottle. And equally, if shopping is becoming more digital and online, there's less of a risk spending, I don't know, £40 on a smaller bottle than there is spending £200 on a full-size bottle. So again, that kind of just making it easier for people to sort of try your products and to understand your brand and kind of enjoy themselves with your brand, you know, I think that's key as well from a sort of simpler perspective.
I think you're right with the enjoyment. So, you know, that's a big part of this sector, but this is a big part of human nature, that you, particularly when there are so many things, kind of external pressures fixing on us. And it's quite interesting, before we started, Florence, you were talking about your fragrance line. Was it fragrance line? And I was thinking about, I bought a friend of mine a candle, Mental Clarity. And I thought, oh, I don't know what this smells like, but she needs this. So yeah, I will send her this. And I think there's that, we're really understanding the connection between names, concepts, and all of these other elements.
Yeah, and even like I was watching a documentary and it was not like a positive thing, but it was talking about like the essential oil industry and just this kind of boom that's happening in America at the moment. But I was just so surprised to the detail at which people could say, sometimes incorrectly, that this specific essential oil does this. And I've never, like, in in the last 10 years or so that I've been working in the industry, felt that there's ever been a time where consumers are able to be very specific about certain raw materials. And again, like what we were saying earlier about clean beauty, like sometimes there's misinformation out there, but people want to know, you know, that this product does this and it's because it contains these ingredients and this makes it a clean product or a non-clean product, or this makes it efficient or inefficient. So I think that is really interesting as well.
But do you think there is a lot more to do though in that area? I definitely agree, you know, consumers are looking for it and it's great for brands to be able to really substantiate their claims. But within the fragrance industry, we have about, I mean, where I work, we've got about 1,500 raw materials that go into creating fragrances. And yes, quite a lot of the naturals we can kind of understand, and they have links with psychology and well-being. But there are so many that have never been properly researched for their effects on mental health. And so I think this is going to be a massive boom era looking at these raw materials, because people want products that will actually benefit them in a certain way that's not just making them smell nice, especially if they're smelling nice but nobody else can actually smell them. So, you know, but yeah, I mean, I think that's really quite an exciting area to develop.
I think that brings in, I was saying when we were talking earlier, that all of you study different things, you all have different backgrounds, and we can see the need for kind of understanding of the scientific element of these products, understand the kind of supply chain element, the marketing, all of these different areas. So I wanted to ask kind of what were the key skills that you brought with you into this sector, and what were the skills that you had to develop in order to be able to navigate it?
I graduated from London College of Fashion in fashion management and marketing. And then I left, obviously having a good experience of sort of across the board marketing skills, journalism, you know, writing, obviously work experience along the way, that kind of thing. And then I sort of set up my business with my business partner, really not having many skills in terms of experience. But I think that's where we go back to what we were saying earlier about, you know, opportunity for people with, you know, hard work and the skill sets of, you know, people, and, you know, being able to explore different relationships and opportunities. And that's how I sort of began my business, which then, you know, 20 years on, I you know, can look back at my time at the college, which you know, was a long time ago, but it you know, it's still producing fantastic alumni that you know, are in the industry, and hopefully will, you know, continue to attract people to come through.
So I have a degree in chemistry. I graduated quite a long time ago, and since then I've worked in product development for beauty. I've been an analytical chemist. I've also worked in product marketing. And I've always been a bit of a geek when it comes to smell. So studying chemistry obviously gave me lots of sort of technical insight and that sort of logical mindset to be able to work with quite an intangible product, which can be quite difficult to sort of pin down. But my love of brands and marketing has definitely helped me along the way. And kind of over the last few years, psychology has become much more important, you know, trying to understand what the consumer wants, trying to understand what our direct client wants when they're talking about fragrance, and also how fragrances can affect people. And again, that's kind of quite an area that I'm kind of more and more interested in.
For me, for my part, I read modern languages, what feels like a lifetime ago. I studied French and German at Oxford, which was a part language, part literature course. And I think the skill set that helped me the most when I entered into marketing with zero kind of commercial acumen was the whole storytelling side of it. I think a lot of marketing hinges on creating something that emotionally resonates with your consumer, telling a story, in particular with fragrance brands, because that's where I started out, was working on YSL fragrances many moons ago. It's about telling a story that entrances them and gives them a sense of what the product will do for them without actually talking about the notes of the fragrance. You know, in that first communication, when you market a luxury fragrance, as Ange will know, you don't talk about the notes in the ads. You just create a world. So I think that's the side that helped me the most. But I would say for someone who doesn't come from a commercial or a business background, there is plenty of scope to find your feet on the job. It's a very hands-on thing. So I think you should never feel like, based on your lack or non-lack of those specific skill sets, that you can't enter into the industry. It's very welcoming, I would say.
Can I just say, I feel like a baby. I feel like I'm still developing my skill set. I'm like winging it. I studied cosmetic science at London College of Fashion, and I definitely went in with an interest in like science and design. And I think coming out from the degree gave me an understanding of like product development and the kind of baseline science that I would need. And I feel like in my career, I literally feel like I'm winging it, and I'm just learning something new every day, especially because it's the mix of product development alongside running a business. And I just think business is changing. It's changed so much since I started my business. So yeah.
I think we all still think we're probably winging it, Flo, don't worry.
I think that's the joy, because I think that if you felt like you'd arrived and you knew how it all worked, then probably you're behind the curve now and you need to retire. So so you learn till you die. But I really like that idea of, you need to understand the technical elements, because you can't damage people and you can't make false claims and so on. But you can't translate that to people in a scientific way, because nobody's going to read a paper in a science journal or whatever to understand the affordances of a natural oil or something. So that idea of storytelling is hugely important. And I have an English degree and I worked in marketing, not having really any idea what marketing was. I've learned, in the 20 years since I started working there, what it is. But I think there's that whole thing of storytelling is hugely important. And one of the big critiques of marketing is a lot of the stories that we were told about ourselves were what was wrong with us. And then we were told that we had to buy these products to fix that or to make us feel better. But there's also the possibility of marketing, kind of, what Flo was talking about, but that thing of actually we can bring people in much more. And it's about celebrating ourselves, having joy, enhancing our kind of life experiences. So where do you sit, having to kind of earn your keep in that sector? Where do you sit in terms of that line?
I think for me, it's made me really happy to see how the shift of power has been so overwhelmingly moved to the consumer in this new time. And I feel like brands who don't uphold the values which the modern consumer holds dear, which are largely centered around inclusivity, whether that be ethnic inclusivity, gender equity, preservation of the environment, and working sustainably. Consumers will police those brands and they will demonize those brands who don't sort of change the way they work, or new brands coming to the market without having considered those topics. I feel like to be a new brand, or to be even an existing brand in today's climate, you need a reason to set. You need the kind of you need to be able to justify why you are producing anything and why you are selling something to the consumer. And we have this culture now of like, you have the cancel culture, but you also have accounts like Diet Prada and Estee Lauder who will call out brands who don't, A, who don't adhere to those principles, or B, who appear to do so inauthentically. I think that's a key point as relative to what we were talking about earlier around how brand can relay their positioning to a consumer effectively and how to do it authentically. Like, you can't just come out of nowhere and say, okay, we're putting our money behind the environment or women's rights or trans visibility just because they're the buzzwords of this year, or Black Lives Matter for that matter. It needs to be in a way that's authentic to you. So I think that brands who just pick a cause because it's the kind of flavor of the day, they won't succeed from doing that. It can't be performative. It needs to be really, really authentic. So I really enjoyed seeing consumers take up arms. And I think I know this talk is about the psychology of fashion. I think we as humans are very social creatures, and it's very hard not being able to socialize. But I think the flip side of that, now that we're forced into our own bubble and just connected through the web, is that we rally around hashtags and we rally around movements. That's how we find our brethren. Hashtag becomes a call to arms, and you get behind Black Lives Matter, you get behind the sustainability crisis, the David Attenborough document, like all these things get shared and retweeted, and that's how you find your community in a world where you can't physically do it. It's really encouraging to see that effect on brands who have been around sometimes for decades without sort of changing the way they do business. And I'm thinking of certain heritage French brands who I won't name, who you'd walk into a department store and they'd have like 6 shades of foundation. You're like, are you serious? Like, how can you do that in this current world? And now those brands are changing because the consumer demands it. So for me, thinking of whether the outcome of this will be positive or negative, I think it's so exciting to see the creativity that'll come out of the new brands and the new creators, and also what the older brands will do to keep up and to change the way they work.
I think the other good thing that's been happening is seeing brands, have to be a little bit more creative about how they communicate their messages. It seems like, a lot of brands have had to go back to basics, actually, because obviously with, the first lockdown, it meant that, some brands didn't have access to, a lot of the facilities that they would normally have to sort of create, assets or any, marketing assets, etc. So it's been really refreshing, actually, to see some brands going back to basics and, seeing lots of sort of unpolished content coming out on social media. I feel like that's a really sort of, I don't know, it feels more accessible, I feel, for consumers, and certainly gives brands a bit more of a personal touch. So I think that's been really good to see.
Sorry. I was just about to say as well, because brands use technology a lot, obviously, in social media and marketing, and all sorts of other things probably in the background that we don't even know about. And I think because of that, it's great because it kind of touches a wider audience, but equally, I think it sometimes distances that audience as well. So this idea of making brands more human, I definitely think is kind of key, and having conversations and letting them be involved in the new product development process, and just listening to people and seeing what they want. I mean, it's just, it's brilliant.
Yeah, just to add to what everyone's saying, I think the most exciting thing for me is that to be authentic, which is a word that's come up quite a bit, you have to be honest. And I think you can see some brands kind of like grapple with it because it's just kind of like, oh, how do we market authentic? And then they do something silly and they end up on Diet Prada. But I think for like smaller brands coming into the space, the fact that like that whole thing of having to pretend that you're bigger than you are, like you don't have to do anymore. And actually you can show, like if you're a one-man band, you can show your one-man band. If you're working from a small studio, you can show that. You can show, I think also visible founders has become a huge thing, which I think is great for the industry. I think it's given a lot of women in the industry a voice. And also founders that, because I think when I think about like my kind of introduction to the industry, whenever you saw, a top selling item or a top selling product, there was always this like glamorous model that presented it. And now you're seeing just like founders who are just regular or just like brand advocates, whether it just be influencers, and there's so many different categories within that. There's like momfluencers and student influencers and all these different categories that is just the kind of honest opening into everyday life. And I think for me that's super exciting because it's not a difficult thing to do.
And I think that's really inspiring. It shows that anybody can do it. So, go out there and give it a try.
It's very good. In the past, we've had these kind of tensions where the good brands got demonized and the bad brands could do whatever they want. So I don't know whether things are shifting in that. So I don't want to name any brands here, but we all know some, brands who honestly don't care at all. And so if they do something wrong, they're like, well, what do you expect from us? Whereas the brands that really try, they can have the tiniest thing, like someone who worked for them had a bad experience and that's it, kind of ruins their brand identity. So do you feel like that's shifting? Are people more kind of forgiving, or is that still going to be a key challenge for brands who care, if you like?
I think it's going to be a very slow shift. I think there definitely will be a shift. And I think the brands who don't pivot to the tune of the consumer appetite now will over time suffer. And I think if you're a massive brand who has this huge following and maybe you're a very prestigious luxury house, for example, you still have a large consumer base, maybe more in the older generation, who still think of luxury as something that's a concept that's down to price point and quality and exclusivity. And I think the modern definition of luxury is not at all about exclusivity, it's more about inclusivity and accessibility. Still, you have that price point and that quality piece. I mean, that's never going to change. But over time, you will see them start to lose equity because their brand positioning is no longer relevant to that modern consumer who over time will be earning and will be fueling the luxury industry. And I think will be a much more discerning customer in terms of ethics and the way a brand operates. So I think it will be a very, very slow shift. And I think the more challenger brands come to the marketplace, the more options consumers have. So I think it's really important to fuel creativity. And I think one thing the pandemic has done has kind of created this big void and this big blank space, because we're now suddenly so educated and we're spending more time consuming the stats and documentaries and all of the studies being done on the different parts of the industry and how they're affected by the ethics of consumption. But yeah, it's clear to see some brands are just ignoring it, but it's also refreshing to see those who aren't. And I'm thinking of, I know we sort of wouldn't name brands, I guess, because this is a positive call out. A brand like Burberry, and I know they've had bad rep in the past in terms of sustainability practices and how they recycle and how to get rid of their non-purchase stock. But I feel like they've made a good effort to connect with a younger consumer by creating surprising new ways to engage with them. I know that they've partnered with a lot of gaming companies to create this kind of virtual experience for their younger customer, but also the work they're doing with promoting creativity in youth demographics and other things they're doing in sustainability. And I think the Kerrigan group as a whole is one of those corporations which have really done a good job to set themselves targets and goals, both short-term and long-term, to change the way they work and keep themselves honest. So yeah, it's exciting times ahead, but I think it'll be a slow shift, and it relies, I think, on the Gen Z and the Gen Z and the millennial consumer who fuel those demands and who are the ones who will destabilize the authorities, I think.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think like the way people like purchasing behavior is changing so much. So I think when I think about the bad brands, a lot of the time the thing that they've had is the fact that more people shopped from physical retail or from department stores or from your I keep saying drugstore because I keep going on calls with Americans, but your Boots, your Superdrugs, and it was pretty much okay. Who can spend the most? Who can get the most amount of space? Who can get the shop window? And I think as more and more people are comfortable with shopping online now, like being in lockdown in the UK, if it's non-essential, that's pretty much the only way you can shop. I think just levels out that playing field. So I think the need for a bad brand to turn good is kind of stronger than ever before, because you just can't rely on the fact that the customer I've had, I will always have, because now they're being presented with so much more when it comes to options digitally, or like Kay mentioned before, in these kind of like really cool new retail concepts that speak directly to people and their needs and their desires to, you know, shop more ethically. So if you're, you know, doubling down on being bad, I think you're just going to be irrelevant at a point.
Good. I'm going to hang out more with you. Positive outcomes. I don't know, Kay, is this something that you want to start off with? But we talked a little bit before we started about this physical, digital kind of interplay. And so some kind of surprising developments have happened during the pandemic around shifts off digital or virtual into real, and kind of needs to shift on to virtual. So how does this kind of affect the sector?
Well, I mean, there's no denying that the future is digital. You know, the digital sphere is allowing brands to, you know, reach wider audiences quicker, faster, you know, and all those positive things that we've just been speaking about. But there's nothing that will take away the sort of the physical love of touching, feeling, smelling, experiencing. You know, you can't necessarily get the same experience online. You know, we all know that, you know, it's convenient and it's quick and it's fast and it's, you know, it's very effective and easy, but it doesn't give us the experience that I think we all miss so desperately, especially in these lockdown times. You know, personally, I just miss, you know, speaking to people in shops, learning brands' stories, even if it's a bigger brand and it's someone just sort of recommending something they've tried, or it's all those things that you just can't get that from a computer or a phone. So I think that the physical side will certainly come back. I feel like people are missing that sort of real experience, and also experiencing retail with your friends and your family. You know, that's a big part, isn't it, of consumerism. It's doing things together. I feel like online shopping is it's very, you know, you tend to do it alone, and it's not so sharing things. But so yeah, I think the physical thing people are really missing, and I think that bricks and mortar stores are, you know, here to stay, and let's hope they come back very soon.
I think from a fragrance point of view, obviously keep going on about fragrance, I'm a perfumer. Digital is really difficult, and it has been difficult. Obviously, people, if they're going to spend over £100 on a product that they can't return if they've opened it, you can't expect them to kind of happily buy it online and hope for the best. So again, I think, you know, there are lots of apps that have launched recently where it's talking more about the fragrance, but again, talking about ingredients of a fragrance, describing what it smells like, it's almost impossible to really get it across to the consumer exactly what it's going to be like. So I think things like subscription methods and also sending out testers pre-purchase are going to be ways forward, because people really need that physical product. So yeah, fragrance digitally it still has a very long way to go.
Yeah, and have you seen much in terms of new technologies that try to mimic the social elements? So I've seen some interesting kind of experiments in trying to have kind of multi-user retail experiences so you can meet your friends, but it hasn't. I mean, I've been watching this for about 15 years and I keep being told it's coming. You know, haptics are improving and the kind of online experience is getting kind of better all the time, but it doesn't seem to be kind of pushing forward. Are people seeing a desire for that?
I think, as Kay was saying, especially with the lockdown, I think people are starting to crave actual physical stores and going out with their friends, making a day of it and turning it into an experience. And yeah, doing that digitally is just impossible, dare I say. Well, hopefully, maybe in the future things will change, but yeah, I think it's that human contact and the experiences and tastes and smells that we want, and the sounds of being in a busy shopping street.
And I feel like, well, as far as tech can go in simulating the product benefits, so for example, makeup try-ons, and B, the service element like tutorials and things and virtual consultation, you will never, ever, ever, save for the day when you can kind of project a product physically onto someone through a screen, be able to mimic that end benefit. And I think that a lot of cosmetics and fashion, a lot of the experience and the way we engage with those brands, there is always this element of showmanship of like walking out of a store with a bag, or, you know, having the makeup done on your face by someone who's trained to do it, which you just can't get at home. And personally, like, I don't know if you can tell, but I've not been to the barber since March. And one of the people I miss the most, more than certain family members, is my barber. So say going into the barbers, there's nowhere I can mimic that from home, right? Even if, you know, normally I would go with a friend or by myself, the fact remains that I would never be able to truly get that experience at home. So no, I'm really encouraged I'm really hopeful as Kay is to see the return to bricks and mortar, but I do think there will also be a shift in the way we choose the stores we go to, because I think for a long time there will be a sort of reticency about going out because of the fallout of COVID. So I feel like the retailers and the stores which either A, provide a specific service that you would go to, or B, you have built some kind of emotional rapport with, will be the ones that will still thrive. And I feel like we haven't seen the end of the high street fallout, which this pandemic has just accelerated. So I do think there'll be a lot more sort of closures and bankruptcies before the new retail model comes to light. And I do think the function of the B&M stores will be more about like a showroom rather than e-commerce. I think will still grow as a primary platform for purchase in the years to come. But I do think, yeah, the showroom function, which you can't mimic online, will still retain its function in stores.
It's kind of like the online is great for repeat purchase, but for that sampling and kind of trialing, you can't really beat the physical. So we're kind of coming towards the end of our panel. And one thing I really wanted to ask you about is what you think the kind of future holds, and what you think if someone who was wanting to enter this industry, what would be the big kind of things they need to think about in terms of joining the industry, the kind of skills they might bring to it, where it's all going?
I would say that it's a fabulous industry to be in. And I've been in it for quite a number of years now, and people, once they're in it, they don't tend to leave. So they kind of move around and you kind of meet people in different roles, but you always meet the same people. And it's a very varied industry. So, it's not just about product, but there is the sales, there's product development, there's marketing. There are so many different skills that can be used in so many different areas that, don't necessarily be fixated on just being a perfumer or just being a marketing director. Explore other different areas, because it's, once you're in the industry, it's great.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. Absolutely love being in this industry, and honestly don't see myself ever leaving. One thing I would definitely say though is that through the course of my career, my short career so far, I've just seen the industry become more and more tech enabled. And I think especially if you want to become an entrepreneur within the beauty industry, it's kind of like this weird and wonderful thing where now I believe that anything you can think of, you can create, but there's a very kind of specific skill set. And so I feel like if you don't have an interest within like technology, partnering with someone who does, or finding an organization that perhaps has that area already covered so that you can work on whichever area you're interested in. But I'm definitely just seeing more and more, even as my business grows and develops, just how much like tech and data is playing a massive role.
Yeah, so there's a need to be tech fluent, even if you're not the one who drives the tech, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'd say, to get into sort of more of the creative or marketing industries, I'd say, don't give up. I think the silliest idea can sometimes prove to develop into a really brilliant idea. Don't take too much notice of what people, if people laugh at an idea, then just if you think it's a good one and you've done your research, and then you have to keep going with something sometimes. And I'd say just connect with as many people as you can, and just reach out and try and sort of, broaden your network of people. I think that's really important. And just be positive.
Yeah, I totally agree on the network, which I think both Kay and Florence touched on. It's so important to be open to bringing different skill sets and ways of like perspectives even into your own. As I said earlier, I don't think you almost need to enter into the industry with any particular skill set kind of nailed. And so to that point, just be very open with regards to the roles you take on, especially early in your career. Like that's the time I feel like to move through the things that you maybe don't want to stay in forever, but you pick up the skill sets. But I would say try and identify early on what drives you, whether that's a certain ethical conviction or a creative vision, or something you want to see changed in the industry, and kind of be dogged and resilient about that, because I think the people coming into the industry, especially this year and next, stand to make a lot of change in it.
So just to close, apart from where your own companies or where you work, just to try and even the field, who do you think is getting it right now? Who's kind of winning in this space? Who are the ones to watch?
So I've loved seeing, I will cite two brands. One which is a bit newer or a bit more underground, which is Bode, which I think is an American brand, and they are a fashion brand. I think they just do menswear. But their whole business model is about upcycling. So they'll take sort of unused textiles and create really desirable, sometimes one-off, sometimes serialized pieces. And I think that's a really interesting initiative, which I guess the big players can't do because they produce at such scale, but it's kind of redefining the relationship between vintage and luxury in an interesting way. And then to call out a bigger brand, I've been interested to see what Gucci are doing in their the new ways they market their products. And I think what they've done now with their Sims collaboration just now, where they've kind of designed for a virtual world, it's shown that they've really thought carefully about who their younger consumer is and what habits they can tap into, because of course gaming is one of those core digital native areas which fashion hasn't really played in historically. So yeah, I would say Gucci has been an interesting case study in marketing.
I'm really excited about Colourpop, and they have a contract manufacturing arm, and like a lot of people now know that they do or historically have done a lot of the manufacturing for the Kardashian brands. And I think it's just exciting to see, like, they're not a really new company, but relatively new company from what traditionally is like, you've got your big like L'Oreal, Estée conglomerates that usually play those roles. So it's quite interesting to see like a growing brand also have like a product development arm to their business.
I quite like what Rayburn have been doing. In lockdown, Christopher Rayburn did quite an interesting thing where you could sort of download a pattern and make something at home, which I thought was really a nice way of sort of buying into a brand. And obviously they're a lot about sustainability, but it was just a nice way, I felt, to sort of connect with consumers that don't, might not be able to afford or necessarily buy the product, but they could still relate to the brand in some way.
Okay, so I think we'll kind of wrap it up, but that was great. Thanks so much. I think I feel much more positive now about the future from your perspectives on the industry. And also I think what you've pointed out is there's space for anyone who's interested in this industry. So it's not one where there's a particular skill set. And then the other thing that really came through was this idea that the kind of dogged competition isn't the kind of focus here. So it's really thinking about all of the different people that you can bring together to do something interesting, and collaborating with others who have the same kind of views or aims or ambitions, which is very nice and refreshing also. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming along today and for your contribution. And yeah, that's it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Thank you.